State University's Center for International Business Education and Research, CIBER, in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm Lian Liu. We come to you on behalf of the MSI CIBER Consortium that are organizing and sponsoring this webinar series. We thank each and every one of you for joining us from several different time zones. We are really grateful that you choose to spend the hour with us. This marks the 65th webinar since we started in April 2020. As a reminder, these webinars are being recorded. If you want to watch again or forward to others, you can find the recording of this one and previous sessions on our GSU-CIBER website or our YouTube channel. Today's webinar is on entrepreneurial ecosystem. As the global business landscape rapidly changes due to technological advancement and geopolitical, public health, and all other challenges, the entrepreneurial ecosystem also interacts with new emergent activities and interactions. This new landscape offers new opportunities for both business, research, and practice. Today's speakers will share with us their insights from research and consulting on pillars of entrepreneurial ecosystem, facilitators and complicators for new ventures to survive and thrive. Sebastian Vandervet, a consultant and communication expert of international business, will moderate today's session and introduce the speakers, Dr. Pinar Buchbalja and Professor Maxim Belinsky. With that, we now turn to Sebastian.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us from around the world, and happy St. Patrick's Day. We have a very exciting seminar ahead of us. So I'd like to start right away with introducing our two distinguished panelists. We have Pinar Buchbalja, who's a visiting scholar at Georgia State University. She hails from Istanbul normally, where she is an associate professor at Yildiz Technical University, Department of Business Administration. Her research spans international entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial ecosystems, innovation strategies, and inter-firm collaborations. Now, she's also a Fulbright Scholar, British Academy Scholar, and a member of the Academy of International Business. Welcome, Pinar. Thank you for joining us. And then we also have with us today Maxim Belinsky. He's a Belarusian native, currently a professor at the University of Reading, United Kingdom. He's also a research fellow at the Institute for Development Strategies, Indiana University in Bloomington. And he's had an extremely international career, so very good person to talk about international business and entrepreneurship. He's worked for University of Bolzano in Italy, Loughborough University, University College of London, University of Leicester, University of Economics in Bratislava, and Belarusian State University. His research interests also lie in the area of entrepreneurship, innovation, regional economics. So a lot of overlap between the two of you. And then he's also an editor, I should say, of this, the Small Business Economics and Entrepreneurship Journal. So welcome, Maxim. Great to have you with us today. So before I give a brief chance for the two panelists to introduce themselves, a quick note on how this is going to work for the next hour or so. We want to make sure this is as interactive as we can. So as soon as after they introduce themselves, we'll dive deep into the topic and you'll hear more from them. But we really want this to be a two-way dialogue. So feel free to use the Q&A function and the chat box on the bottom to insert your comments, questions, and I'll do my best to relate them. Unfortunately, we can't open everyone's microphones, but we will moderate the discussion as appropriate. So Pinar, I want to give a quick chance for you to introduce yourself. Again, welcome.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and welcome everyone. It's great to be here. Actually, you really provided a thorough information on my maybe I can add that, yes, I've been working in the field of international business and entrepreneurship since years, and I'm feeling very lucky to be an engaged scholar, to have strong connections with the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Turkey and with some other ecosystems all around the world. So I've been teaching in this field, and I have also been conducting research projects, especially by focusing on the internationalization of new ventures and how entrepreneurial ecosystem facilitates this. So we will be talking about details soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Pinar. Maxim?
Hello, everyone, and Sebastian, many thanks for this great introduction. When you put all the list of the universities where I have worked, I started thinking about how many more universities I will work in the future. So thank you for, of course, bringing the audience and the great speakers. It's 60 plus series of the webinars, which really deliver high value in international business, entrepreneurship, and management. So I'm thrilled to be part of this great business and this really great community that you have assembled there in Atlanta in the Georgia State University. And of course, special thanks to the director of the Center for International Business Education and Research for inviting me, and my co-pilot in Entrepreneurial Ecosystem, Pinar, who has been there really helping me and motivating me to better understand how ecosystem in different parts of the world work. And I think absolutely it is a lot about internationalization. It's a lot about assembling and bringing together evidence and experience from large and small and very large cities, developed and emerging economies from different parts of the world, to better understand how entrepreneurs work and grow and internationalize in different contexts. And that's what we're going to talk today about.
Great, thank you, Maxime. So again, like I said, very interactive. Make sure you ask questions, comments, and I'll try to also ask the questions that's on everybody's mind. I'm not an academic scholar in this field. I understand that even though this is this 65th webinar that GSU has organized, this topic has never come up. So we're really excited to cover it today. And entrepreneurial ecosystem, I know some of it from practice, from living it in my daily life, but I'm not an academic expert. So please take us through what it means, what the context is, what research area, insights for entrepreneur. And I understand, the next section will take about 25, 30 minutes. There'll be some slides. We'll try to go back and forth between the slides and actually seeing the speakers. And again, make it as interactive as we can. But Pinar, over to you to give a more thorough introduction of the topic.
Okay, thank you very much again, Sebastian. So let me make a brief introduction. First of all, it's great to talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems, because we know that in recent years, entrepreneurial activity has gained a considerable amount of attention, both of the scholars, practitioners, and policymakers. No surprise, of course, when we think of all those disruptive events changing the nature of the business landscape and leading to the emergence of new entrepreneurial initiatives and the emergence of new business models. And entrepreneurial ecosystem actually provides the main context for the formation of that entrepreneurial activity. It includes several actors and factors that we can think of. It includes investors, suppliers, customers, governmental bodies, universities, entrepreneurs themselves, so several things interacting with each other so intensely. So here, actually, we are talking about a close interaction between the actors and factors, and they coexist together, they co-evolve together. And there are some domains in that entrepreneurial ecosystem, and there is also an interaction between these different domains, which we name as a very special form of interaction as the complementarities, as we will be covering briefly in a minute. So there is a lot going on there, a complex set of interactions, and that complexity and nonlinearity that we observe in the interactions actually reflects the very essence of entrepreneurship. So that's why we should call entrepreneurial ecosystems as a concept with practical importance. So that's something really exciting. And if we are to understand how entrepreneurial ecosystems function, we need to pay attention to context. Context really matters, because with context changing, a lot of things change. In different contexts, we see different types of resource bases. We see different types of cultural aspects. We see that institutional mechanisms vary. We see that governance mechanisms vary. And depending on this variation, the nature of interactions vary. And it is those interactions that the whole ecosystem idea is built upon. So that's why context matters. And right at this point, let me share my slides and leave the floor to my colleague Maxim to further elaborate on the concept and the complementarities and how context matters. Okay, so the floor is yours, and then I will continue with the internationalization aspect. So I'm sharing the slides and the floor is yours, Maxim. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pinar, for really walking us into this topic. But I want to say that, well, in particular, there's been a growing attention to the entrepreneurial ecosystems, we all know. And I think it's a big elephant in the room, which at some point, or in the science, which at some point was impossible to ignore. And in particular, of course, the policymakers, and researchers and people who are related and who want to promote entrepreneurship activity in cities and countries, they embrace this concept happily of entrepreneurial ecosystem because it was possible for psychologists, managers, public policy works, and people from different fields and backgrounds, international business, of course, to be in part of a conversation. And there's been a plethora of empirical and theoretical studies, mainly empirical, but now more theoretical studies, which of course were very detailed, and we look at the solutions for cities and regions and companies. How can entrepreneurial activity be enhanced, and how regional economic development be enhanced through entrepreneurial ecosystem? Well, I want to say that originally entrepreneurial ecosystem literature, or in general entrepreneurship literature, has generally focused more on individuals and firms. However, the emergence of ecosystem concept has changed everything. It changed the focus on regions, on communities, on the places. And it started mainly from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. We know the entrepreneurial ecosystem indicators, those papers of Sir Blaslow and Zoltan Knox and colleagues starting from 2014, that started bringing, of course, the papers of and conceptual model of Eric Stem, Ben Spiegel, all contributing to that important foundations of entrepreneurial ecosystems. And of course, what is this? There may be different answers. It depends from the starting point of a conversation, and the starting point is very different viewpoints between different fields and researchers. So we may come to different conclusions and definitions what entrepreneurial ecosystem really is. Well, this is, of course, everyone will have their may come up with the very different definitions. But what we know, it's a core questions about why. What matters is the context, and every entrepreneur, when they are starting a business in the ecosystem, would come across independently. They are in the developing countries or developed. They are in entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is booming from complementarity of resources, or which has a lack of resources, or ecosystem of a certain industry or a geographical area. They will ask those 4 questions. And I think that what we can think of talking about entrepreneurial ecosystem context is how do we identify the opportunities? What is the role of the context of the institutional environment, of the industry environment where entrepreneurs live and work, to identify those opportunities? And here, the environment which may be rich in knowledge, rich in multinationals, rich in resources, ideas, is definitely getting more conducive for creating those opportunities. So the second would be, how do entrepreneurs acquire and combine resources in this context? So do they do them themselves? Do they do it with multinationals or in collaboration with other partners? How these resources are exploited and how they help to realize those entrepreneurial opportunities. How do we make judgment about the condition of risk and uncertainty? And we all know that risk is measurable. That is what incumbent companies and multinationals do. They try to measure risks. Well, what entrepreneurs do, and that's what Frank Knight was saying back in his book on the risk, uncertainty, and profits back in 1921. He was saying, well, entrepreneurs embrace uncertainty, and this is how they go forward. So that's clear difference between, for example, the multinationals or large incumbent firm and entrepreneurs, in that entrepreneurs are risk-oriented and embracing uncertainty in particular. So the fourth point and the fourth question about context is, how do market, institutional, and other intra-firm contexts enable those constraints and judgment to grow and flourish? And I also want to talk about this, the main four pillars of institutional context. Yeah, the next slide. So which we learned from the paper of Stanholm and Knox in JBV back in 2013. It's an important of regulatory environment, so the regulation, the legal law, and the regulation where the entrepreneurs work. That may different. I mean, democracy and entrepreneurship. They're the strengths of democratic institutions, enforcing contracts, exiting the markets, entering the markets, protecting and registering property. All that matters for entrepreneurs. And we know how diverse are these institutional regulatory pillars in different countries. Cognitive dimension, business schools, through education, through business experience, understanding the entrepreneurial opportunities, the one we talked about, those four questions. Normative pillar. Is it a norm to be an entrepreneur? Is it a hostile environment for entrepreneurship? Or in fact, there is a culture of entrepreneurship? And so we can think of the Silicon Valley and Atlanta, Georgia, and we can think of Austin, Texas, and other places where the light bulbs will be switching on in different times of American history. And so this is about really bringing this norm of entrepreneurship and creativity. Finally, conducive pillar, something that make entrepreneurs to act. And of course, industrial context. And I came across a book recently. It's a 1,000-page book. Haven't read it yet, 1,000-page, but I practice a couple of pages a day. It's called Cities in Civilizations, and they go city by city. They talk about Boston, they talk about Berlin, they talk about Tokyo. I mean, not they, Peter Hall. And so it's about every city, and city will be related to certain industry, where industry would be like a conductors industry in Silicon Valley, for example, or semiconductors or other industry in their different cities, will really define the fate of entrepreneurs, create those opportunities, and in a way promote a certain decision making. So there's industrial context that also matters. There may be some other context, geographical context and another, and many digital context, of course, matters, as we know. And there are possibly many more contexts, but I just focused on these two to embellish this topic. And then there's another question. Okay, we know what is entrepreneurial ecosystem. We know what may consider this entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that was the first paper that I published with my great friend and mentor, David Aldrich, on entrepreneurial ecosystem framework conditions. So we looked at various conditions in the European cities, including trust, informal institutions, and formal institutions, the role of immigration laws, tolerance, resources, access to physical and digital infrastructure, and other factors, brought it up together and call it framework conditions for entrepreneurship. And then we looked at how these framework conditions, in fact, raise startup rate in the cities in Europe. And then some of them you could see they were connected, some of them were less or more connected, but all of them came out to be significant with the certain extent. And then we use the Red Eye Index, which is called Regional Entrepreneurship Development Index, which is a valuable. There's a group of very talented researchers working on this index. There's several series of this available. It's a very good indicator of quality of the context, in particular institutional context and cultural context for European regions. Can be adopted for American regions or for other regions, but it helps to understand, well, in addition to the framework conditions, how that institutional context matters. And we also found that it was all really all together, they were making startup to happen. So,
Max, I'm sorry to interrupt there for a second.
No, it's great. I think I'm done with that.
Layman like me, when you're talking about context and you're talking about institutional contact, industry contact, is more always better? Is there more context, or is there such a thing as too much?
That's what I think entrepreneurial ecosystem approaches often very criticized, because they say it's a bit of like a, well, I wouldn't say it's a kitchen sink that you put many things together and see what comes out of it. I think it's not a kitchen sink, because you need to think carefully, what do you put in? And that's why the model that Eric Stem and colleagues came up with, and I think Pinar can go in more details, they actually thought through specific ingredients in that ecosystem that they made sense of. Pinar, if you can follow up.
Thank you very much. I think it's related to your question, Sebastian, so I can maybe take it over from this point and talk about this framework and then link it to the IB field part. So yes, it is not just about making one context as strong as possible. So we should not be just interested in that just one context and what is there. That's why I find this framework proposed by STEM and his colleagues recently very useful, especially if we are at the intersection point of international business studies and entrepreneurial ecosystem research. Because what we see here is that we already know that an entrepreneurial ecosystem consists of several different factors and actors, and there is an interaction there that we need to pay attention to. But actually, if we are to understand what is going on in entrepreneurial ecosystems, or why an entrepreneurial ecosystem performs better than the others, then we should also pay attention to the interaction among different ecosystems. So it's not about just the context and the interactions within the ecosystem, but actually it is about the interactions across the ecosystems. So that is going beyond the borders of that one local domain, going beyond the borders of that local ecosystem. And that's how we observe an increase in the entrepreneurial output that we expect to see as a result of the properly functioning ecosystem. So right from that point, we can link the subject to international business field, because actually we can assume that successfully operating new ventures is a form of productive entrepreneurial output that we expect to see if we think that there is a properly functioning entrepreneurial ecosystem there. So the number of successful international new ventures should increase as a result of a well-designed entrepreneurial ecosystem. So it is a context determining the international success of new ventures as a form of entrepreneurial output. So right at this point comes a question. How do ventures interact with the ecosystem to facilitate their international expansion? Of course, there are several things that we can associate with this, but let me just give you some insight from my recent research. Actually, we found that in one of our recent studies, we found that new ventures, internationally successful new ventures, interact both with their local ecosystem domains and with other ecosystems in other markets where they're seeking for opportunities. So it is a two-way interaction, actually, simultaneous interaction, or let's say. So, and this interaction takes place at different levels. For instance, we observed firm level interactions, individual level interactions, using founders' own network relations to get more involved with the entrepreneurial ecosystem, with the local entrepreneurial ecosystem and with the international entrepreneurial ecosystem. We also observed that ventures rely upon some firm level resources. For example, they use their human resource base, they use their flexible operational models or business models to get more involved with the local entrepreneurial ecosystem and the international ecosystem, again, to spot opportunities and to seize them. And they also benefit from business level contact, business level factors such as the network of customers, network of investors, network or support of governmental bodies, again, to interact further with their own local ecosystem and the international ecosystem, to foster, to facilitate their international growth. So they are interacting with both ecosystems, both local and international, and they are interacting at the individual level, firm level and business context level. So that's an important insight for further IB studies. And also, again, important for the international business field is the international connectedness or the global connectedness of the entrepreneurial ecosystem itself. And we see it very much related to the evolutionary phases of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Actually, evolution of a phenomena highly depends upon its resource base. And of course, we can assume that as international level connections increase, then resource base would be enriched for the ecosystems, which will help to make progress in that ecosystem. So maybe we should find some ways to measure how globally connected is an ecosystem. Maybe we can work on developing some kind of measures, like, for example, measures that we use in DHL Global Connectedness Index, that breadth and depth measures, as we all know. Maybe we can just adapt that kind of measures to the ecosystem research as well. And we should also come up with some kind of indexes to give us hint about the international connectedness of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And a final point is the role of multinational enterprises in the ecosystem. So do we think that they help making progress for the entrepreneurial activity in that ecosystem? Or maybe they are just complicators with respect to certain aspects. So let me just put very quick insight about that, and then I will pass it over to Maxim, Sebastian, if it's okay for you. So again, in our recent research, we, for example, found that the support of multinational enterprises in the ecosystem actually facilitates things for new ventures there. There are very fruitful collaborations, for instance, that we observe between the multinational enterprises and new ventures. Those enterprises sometimes act as CVCs, corporate venture capital bodies, or they sometimes build open innovation systems to include new ventures and to co-create and co-develop things with them, which for sure improves the learning curve of the new ventures. So that kind of collaborations pay off well. And they also, for instance, if a new venture has a collaboration with a multinational enterprise as a customer-supplier relationship, and if the enterprise is very much satisfied with the services of that new venture, then this relationship is extended to other countries, which is an easy way, a rapid way of internationalization for the ventures. But we also observed some, let's say, counterintuitive things. So maybe, Maxim, you would want to comment on that.
Before you go there, Pinar, a quick question on the practicality of some of this, right? If I'm an entrepreneur and I'm, let's say, based in Atlanta or based in the US somewhere, I've got a successful ecosystem of other entrepreneurs around me. I've got a good regulatory framework. I've got supporting businesses. But I know there's an opportunity abroad doing international business. Am I looking for just the opportunity? Am I looking for supporting ecosystems in those countries where I'm going to go? And if so, what elements of that ecosystem do I value most? Is there such a thing as like a ranking? Is there, do you place certain aspects above other aspects in terms of an entrepreneur looking for opportunity? Obviously, there's the market size, there's the opportunity, but there's also the support of the ecosystem as you talk about. So what elements do entrepreneurs most have to take into consideration in their international expansion?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Actually, there are phases there. Of course, the entrepreneur, the new venture should first of all spot an opportunity. So connections with customers, maybe at that point having close relationships with multinational enterprises. Local multinationals and international multinationals will pay off well, for instance, and investors with strong international networks will be very much critical for those new ventures. And when they go there, once the first they, of course, identify opportunities, and then they go for seizing those opportunities. And at that point, of course, they would need some connections with the let's say regulatory bodies in that other country, and also with some expat communities or business people communities, maybe to get insight about the competitive environment, to get insight about some possible partnerships, because partnership is something very critical that is on the table as well. So first of all, connections with the local ecosystem that will enable them to spot opportunities in that other in those other countries, in those other markets, and then some other connections in addition to that to transform their business models accordingly and to strengthen their partnership opportunities, maybe.
Thank you, Ipna.
I can add to that. I think definitely, Sebastian, entrepreneurial ecosystem compete with each other. Well, I don't know to what extent Santiago, the capital of Chile, ecosystem competes with Tokyo or Los Angeles, but there are studies like that on the for example, Tokyo and LA ecosystem. And we with Pinar did a study called Uncharted Waters of Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Growth and Regions Journal on Istanbul and Reading ecosystem, comparing again two ecosystem with very active multinational companies, in fact, in the UK and in Turkey, and but different city sizes and different contexts, and then how local businesses, how local entrepreneurs benefit by this, by the presence of multinationals and by those context and legal and informal context. So we found that, for example, informal context is used a lot better in Turkey than it is used in the UK, for example. And we also found that of course, there's a lot more collaboration happening in the certain agglomeration economy, for example, between M&Es and local firms that may potentially see it as a source of growth. But in Reading, it was a smaller city on the edges of London. So for that, it's a big opportunity cost for an entrepreneur to start a business or grow a business. You just go and work for a multinational. So that, in fact, almost kill entrepreneurship in some cities. So multinational, of course, or not killed, but it provided a strong competition for talent and local labor force. This is some paper with a group of researchers from as Jeff Martin and Bill Wales and Tatiana Stadler, we are working on about understanding the dark sides of M&Es in terms of what opportunity costs they create, and so how can we leverage those costs. So what we see, we look at the net effect, I think. So there are some, of course, very positive things that come from an M&E. There are some reverse spillovers to the M&E, including spillovers abroad in the foreign companies, sourcing of knowledge and so on. But then what you see is a net effect. A net effect is usually positive.
Do you think that effect is directly influenced by the size of the market? So you got a size of the market like Reading is obviously smaller, multinationals can dominate, whereas the size of Istanbul is huge. There's less chance for any one firm to dominate.
You know, I think it's like from ecological economics. If you put the same fish in the same tank, in the bigger tank, the same fish will grow bigger. So it's something the same. So agglomeration economies matter. And that's what we see also for the emergent economies in the UK. So Birmingham, Manchester, well, mainly Manchester, London, and then Birmingham in the middle. These are the leading three economies in a multinational, in a new firm startups, in high growth. So the agglomeration economies, they change the tide now. And this is where the multinationals are particularly interested to source knowledge from, and of course, source knowledge too. And
just as a level set, we got a question here from the audience that when you're mentioned the relationship between entrepreneurial ecosystem and MNEs. Are you considering them as a horizontal, vertical, or both?
Well, on the top, I would say I would go for both. We don't want to exclude anything.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Pinar, go ahead.
Both in many ways, but of course it totally depends on the type of that relationship. For instance, are we here talking about a customer-supply relationship? Are we here talking about being a part of an open innovation system, co-creating something, etc.? So it will totally depend upon the type of relationship. But mostly when we are talking about, and I should add one more thing to this, we see the positive spillover effects of that kind of relationships when the multinational enterprise is really involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem with good intentions, I mean, in quotes. So when the multinational really wants to be a part of that local entrepreneurial ecosystem and opens its arms to the new ventures there, then it is mostly a horizontal relationship, a kind of collaboration, let's say. But on the other hand, of course, both.
Great. And I have a follow-up question, actually, because I think it matters from my own experience, whether or not you're dealing with the headquarters of a multinational or regional office or a country office. And I would almost venture to say that a regional and country office are more entrepreneurial in their nature and interact more than a head office, which tend to be more insular.
For sure, because at the regional offices, we see corporate entrepreneurship, kind of internal entrepreneurship activities. So yes, it is in their fabric too. Yes.
Great.
So,
do you want to pick up on your presentation?
Yes, so maybe we can conclude with some future research insight. So let me again share my screen.
Before going to that, yeah, please do that. And I just wanted to pick up on the Pinar's talk about the importance of the international startup in the ecosystem. And I think what you want in an ecosystem is to produce, well, has been all the work around productive entrepreneurs, not just having unproductive, destructive, but having productive entrepreneurs that are growing, that are scaling up, and they're going international. And of course, if the entrepreneurial ecosystem is able to nurture these type of startups that are able to compete internationally, that's clearly an evidence of the competitive or an ecosystem creating competitive entrepreneurs or competitiveness of the whole ecosystem. And of course, the M&Es that are there as a part of this ecosystem, as a stakeholders in the ecosystem, what they do the best is they create this international knowledge and provide access to international knowledge, and of course international bridges and networks potentially for those entrepreneurs to scale up. And I think it's absolutely crucial to have an M&Es as an input for that ecosystem model, and then international startups or let's say born globals, etc., as the output of the ecosystem.
And maybe we can also think about the brand image of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you know, having so many strong multinational enterprises there for sure supports the branding of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which in turn attracts international investors and some other international players. So it's kind of a self-feeding cycle, let's say. So let's continue with the future research agenda and conclude the presentation part with that. So just step in, please, Maxim, when you want to comment on those future research things. And of course, the first thing that we can think of is the role of or the changing nature of interactions in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in face of disruptive events, because we have witnessed that a lot. The changing nature of interactions. And also, for instance, we saw the emergence of digital technologies, the wide use of digital technologies in fostering international and local ecosystem interactions. So somehow it became easier for the entrepreneurial ecosystems to go international thanks to the digital technologies. So it changed the nature of interactions. Maybe it changed the nature of complementarities that we observed there. So would you like to comment on this, Maxim?
Yeah, I want to say that definitely companies that are digitally more advanced are better off and are winning of that companies that are digitally uncertain or digitally transforming, because of course they are able to build on the technologies, they enable the tools, and as you say, go international and better connect with their suppliers, customers, competitors internationally, not just within the entrepreneurial ecosystem of Los Angeles or Santiago, as we were, or Istanbul we're talking before, but actually going out. And they're better prepared. They have been better prepared. More digital ecosystem have been better prepared to crisis, to COVID, and they've been more resilient. So the regions, in particular in Europe, what I know, but also in the US, that had a higher percentage of access to internet, broadband, e-commerce. It's almost like an Amazon. You can, when you look at Europe, the Western Europe is more of e-commerce. The East Europe will be still e-commerce, but low. You would almost consider it Amazon border in Europe. And this Amazon border also determined the resilience of companies and startups and competitiveness. So in pandemic, those who were more resilient, the region were more prepared, who had a better digital capabilities and higher e-commerce adoption of digital technologies.
Yes, and for sure, we need more work to be done in this field to further dig the implications. And another very important research topic, sorry, would you add something?
Yeah, I just remembered of a very good report. It's called Digitally Driven. It was commissioned by Google, and it's open access. So it's called Digitally Driven SMEs in times of COVID or SMEs in times of crisis, but you can able to Google it. It's for US, it was done more than 5,000 SMEs all over the 50 states of US 2020, and for Europe, it was done in Digitally Driven 2021. It's in 3 languages or 5 languages, you know, available to access, and you can evidence with all the maps and proofs really can be used as a springboard to develop for both practitioners and for entrepreneurs, kind of to make their mind of what type of technologies they need to look first.
Yeah, it's great, thank you. And another important research topic on the table is understanding the boundaries of the ecosystem, because we mostly, we have a tendency to think of ecosystems as regionally limited phenomena, let's say. But when we look at how new ventures interact with the ecosystems, actually we see that they go beyond the borders. So maybe what defines the borders of the ecosystem, and what does border means, and again, how context determines these boundaries. And that's kind of an ontological question when we look at the issue from a scientific approach. So we should do more to understand the boundaries of the ecosystem, and how should we define that?
There's actually a question I think that pertains directly to that, is that where do customers fit into that, into your entrepreneurial ecosystem? If you're operating in one location, but your customers are another location. So to what extent, in the definition of entrepreneurial ecosystem, do you rely on the ecosystem where your customers are?
And yes, please, Max.
I would say, of course, the customer is about the market size. And we know how many companies from the States move to Asia. I mean, not necessarily in China, but also across Asia, where because their customers were in Asia, for example. So it's their proximity to customers matter, because obviously entrepreneurs work with customers, understanding their culture, their background, what is needed. But is it possible to serve customers in the other ecosystem if you're located in the other ecosystem? Well, I think absolutely possible. While we know a lot of cases when they're M&Es or even entrepreneurs were moving their subsidiaries, or having this presence in the ecosystem where their customers are. It's absolutely important.
But actually, I totally agree with that. But maybe we should also think this too. We should not, interfere. We should not just think of the entrepreneurial ecosystem as it is the same thing with the business context, or as it is the same thing with the market. So yes, customers is a part of the market, customers are part of the business context, but when we're talking about entrepreneurial ecosystems, then it is a supportive mechanism for the formation of entrepreneurial activity. So if we are talking about the support of that specific customer group for the formation of entrepreneurial initiatives of that venture, then it is a part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But otherwise, it's just a part of the market. So we should be able to make those distinctions maybe in our research.
I just wanted to add, I came out, it was one of the conference on geography, and very good example about the boundaries of ecosystem, just by analyzing their firm registration and some boards and analyzing the geographical context, the landscape of a city. They picked up that from the Kendall Square to the Harvard Square, there's basically an avenue, to remember what's it called, the main avenue in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a part of Boston. So it's not the entire Boston, let's say it's a whole ecosystem, but in particular from the avenue from the Kendall Square to the Harvard Square, which is about 1 mile or less, where most of the IT companies, for example, and digital companies were located or are located at the moment. So this itself creates certain boundaries. Well, we can talk about, of course, they're all internationally connected, but just being able to meet somewhere between Harvard Square and Kendall Square may make a difference.
Yep.
I don't know, for those of you who know Boston geography, you may make it up.
Yeah. So also we should pay attention to the typology and how to facilitate productivity spillovers for startups and subsidiaries with the inclusion of M&Es in the entrepreneurial ecosystems. And of course, we need more comparative studies between developed and developing countries in order to understand, in order to grasp the impact of different contexts, of course, on the formation of entrepreneurial ecosystems. And of course, how sustainability goes, how sustainability initiatives and strategies can be supported by entrepreneurial ecosystems, because right now we're talking about sustainable entrepreneurship, and it is getting more and more important in our agenda. And what is the role of entrepreneurial ecosystems? So yes, there is an entrepreneurial activity, which we'll label as the sustainable entrepreneurship, but is the ecosystem aware of that fact? And is the ecosystem transforming itself accordingly to support sustainable entrepreneurship? So that's another important topic. And finally, of course, when we look at the current world politics and political economy trends and things going on, we will be talking about immigrant entrepreneurs more and more. And again, is the entrepreneurial ecosystem prepared to welcome those immigrant entrepreneurs, and do they support the entrepreneurial activities of immigrants? And this is also very important for the policymakers. So these are some future important research topics that we propose. We just want to throw into the field. So let me start.
Great. So we have a number of questions. I also want to ask, before we get to someone from the audience, is we talk about entrepreneurship in very broad general terms. And when most people think about entrepreneurs, they think about Silicon Valley, they think about tech, they think about tech startups. But as we all know, industry and sector is very broad. And startups can be in marketing, can be in many different fields, can be in industry. So is there any research that's being done in terms of the sectors that are most, obviously technology, IT, it lends itself very well to the startup culture, but are there other sectors that really benefit from having a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Actually, yes, you're right. Most of the studies are conducted by taking technology ventures into account, and my research field is very much intertwined with that as well. So maybe, Maxim, can you give some examples from other industries, from other interesting studies?
That's what one of the emerging topic in the field is, becoming a digital entrepreneurial ecosystems. And sometimes it's been misinterpreted by people from different fields. Some of them, like Martin Kenney, for example, he would study digital ecosystems as platform ecosystems, or Marcel Borgers, they would look at digital ecosystem as Uber, for example, or Airbnb, where you have both right? Suppliers and providers and consumers meeting there in the space and as a digital ecosystem. Their geographers or economic geographers would talk, or economists may also talk about digital or tech entrepreneurial ecosystems as something rethinking of a Silicon Valley type of concept. And are we able to recreate Silicon Valley elsewhere? Well, we know there have been many attempts, and even calling the Silicon Roundabout in London. Has it? I mean, have you heard about it? You have heard about it, but we have heard about it less than about Silicon Valley. So it's something that of course is part of our research, and I think different. It may, depending on the starting point of a question and in the field that is asking this question, they may talk about the different ecosystems. But what we know in terms of the digital startups and in terms of in regions or in cities, they clearly rely on infrastructure, physical and digital infrastructure. There's been even a new word created, something like psychodigital, which is a physical or physidigital, physical and digital infrastructure together. That is determining this the starting, entry, and growth of firms like that. And of course, here you also have the work of blitzscalers, where the companies with 3-digit growth rates, or basically 1,000% growth rates, as in ecosystems. There are many examples of those in Istanbul, for example, and other developing economies, but also the US. And so I would also, to wrap up that question, I think thinking of digital startups or tech ecosystems in the developing countries and developed countries, because we know a lot of IT services, they are outsourced now in East Europe and other countries, Turkey and other countries. So the investment in this ecosystem, investment in sustainability or IT investment or R&D investment, let's say $1 will make a lot more in terms of the growth. It will speed up growth to a different extent as it may speed in the, I don't know, in California, for example. So that is interesting. But what is interesting, where do we want to invest? And how much we're going to invest. But what we know, because they are at a different level, it's like a democracy and entrepreneurship. If you change a little bit of democracy in Russia or China, it may make a great deal. But if you change a little bit of democracy in Canada, it's not going to create that many entrepreneurs that maybe it may create in the developing countries and emerging economies. So that's again putting a spotlight on improving the democracy institutions and context, in fact, in the developing countries, and looking at the developing countries where these democracies can happen, like Ukraine, and where this investment may really pay off significantly, because, as I said, the same investment in different context gives completely different outcomes with a different acceleration speed.
And also, maybe I can step in at that point. And also we see some different collaborations between the technology ventures and more conventional small and medium-sized enterprises in emerging economies. So that's an interesting part to pay attention to. Maybe, for example, during the pandemic, we saw the support of technology ventures by providing digital platforms to include very conventional mom and pop shops and that enabled them to survive throughout those harsh pandemic conditions. For instance, we saw digital platforms that you can place orders for restaurants, for conventional small and medium mom and pop shop restaurants. And without the support of those digital platforms, without the support of those technology ventures, it would be impossible for those traditional companies to survive in the pandemic conditions. So that kind of collaborations are also interesting among different industries.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to go back to one of the comments somebody made here. It's very relevant, is that these entrepreneurial ecosystems are really facilitated by a culture of trust and collaboration. Yes. So if some of that is culturally dependent. It will be different in some are low trust culture, high trust cultures around the world. But what are some of the things that maybe government can do from both a regulatory perspective and an incentive perspective to really encourage that level of collaboration between between the flow of talent, information, you know, what role do governments have here?
If we are to link that trust issue to the government, then again, it ends up to democracy, I guess. So, of course, just building mechanisms to support democracy, to make people trust the system, to attract investors from other contexts, markets, and to create a trust-based relationship environment there. But you're absolutely right. Apart from the government's role, you're absolutely right that trust is right at the center. And especially for emerging economies, for instance, we frequently observe in Turkey that the collaboration between entrepreneurs themselves, the support that an entrepreneur gives to another entrepreneur, is very intense and really creates a kind of progress in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So that support between the entrepreneurs, that support, that trust-based relationship is especially important in emerging economies where they are limited with regards to several types of formal institutional mechanisms and resources.
Great point. Maxim, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I would say the trust is such a multi-level and multi-layer phenomena. I mean, one is the trust of individual trust or collective trust, when I trust with the communities. And I think the communities, and we know in the US, they've been coping really well. I don't know, just put of my head of example there. It's also from the paper of Feldman, Marine Feldman in 2014 in Small Business Economics. She talks about people who come back in their native towns and try to contribute to community like Kaufman did at some point. And we know the Kansas City, what happened to that later. And you know, buying a football team or soccer team and so on. So this is the, you know, this is creating a trust. This is community trust, collective trust, but there's also institutional trust, which I think that's more related to the context. And this is what matters, because if you don't trust your government, you don't want to pay taxes, and then you don't want to pay taxes. You become from productive entrepreneur to a destructive entrepreneur, because you benefit by the context or by the ecosystem, by markets, but then you avoid paying taxes, or you are not properly honest with the government and community because you think they are corrupt, for example. And so therefore you turn into an unproductive entrepreneur. So it destroys the whole point of that ecosystem. So in this case, absolutely fighting corruption and finding the ways to through transparency, democracy, but also building the trust between different stakeholders. So that the trust is quite a multi-level phenomena. And this is, again, the spotlight is on developing countries and the fight of corruption.
So governments should for sure promote give back culture. So make their successful entrepreneurs to come back and invest more. Invest with regards to financial capital, intellectual capital, and social capital in all aspects of that capital.
That's a great insight. I think we have time for just about one more question. And very quickly, I thought it was an interesting question here, because I asked earlier on if there's such a thing as an ecosystem that was perhaps too big or too large, too encouraging. Are there dark sides of entrepreneurial ecosystem? The question here, is there any unintended consequences of establishing a large entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Yes.
And the answer could be no. It's fine.
Yes, there is a dark side of entrepreneurship itself. So for sure, there is a dark side of entrepreneurial ecosystems as well. So we are some kind of talking about creating norms there, and what those norms are, how to behave, etc. So what you should value, etc. Sometimes with regards to that, there might be very high destructive competition in the ecosystem, not a constructive one. And when that happens, then it really, it's an obstacle for the formation of entrepreneurial activities. So that kind of aggressive competition is a dark side that we frequently observe in entrepreneurial ecosystems, maybe.
Maxim, 30 seconds or less, anything to add to that answer?
Oh, no, I really appreciate it saying, but entrepreneurship ecosystem is, we know it's also about creating a well-being, is about not only about entrepreneurs, but also in general, making ecosystem be inclusive and work for people. But of course, you may expect, due to the different dynamic capabilities and resources that what people have and competences, there will be a certain differentiation and distribution of the wealth in the ecosystem. And I think the role of entrepreneurs is to respond to that. And it's not only about for profit, but it's also about social entrepreneurship in the ecosystem, I think, which is the topic also great for the future research.
Great, great. I mean, I've certainly learned a lot from both of you. It's been a really enjoyable hour. It's gone by really fast. I want to give you both of you a chance to wrap up with any concluding remarks or thoughts or comments about the discussion today, or messages to the audience. So Maxim, do you want to go first?
Oh, I just would say whatever ideas you've got during this webinar today. So, for example, I've seen ideas in the chat about the role of dynamic capabilities in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, or some negative sides. So I think you just, look at it, test it, go and speak to entrepreneurs, go speak to other people, to all stakeholders, journalists, accountants, lawyers, TTO offices, managers, VC, bankers, policymakers. So go and talk to them if you're equipped with interview method. Take data, secondary data, and analyze it if you're an expert in quantitative methods. But whatever question you have is not, the ideas are not always wrong. It's really about standing on the shoulders of giants, those people who created the international business like Dunning, or people who create entrepreneurial ecosystem like Eisenberg. So, but we need to stand on the shoulders of the giants and add this small value, and that value will be testing your ideas and hypotheses and bringing it up. So the entrepreneurial ecosystem theory is there to help you, and I think it's in a very emergent stage. So you are right on time to contribute.
Great, thank you, Maxime. Pinar?
Thank you. I totally agree with that. And just maybe one final remark. In order to study entrepreneurial ecosystems, you should be a part of entrepreneurial ecosystems. So you should be engaged with the ecosystem. It is not something that you can do in the lab conditions. So go there, listen to them, and be a part of it. So that's my final remark. Thank you.
Great. It's a great way to wrap it up. So again, happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our two panelists, Maxim and Pinar. You've been really informative and great. Over to Leanne, you for a few concluding words, and thank you all the participants from joining us from around the world. Leanne?
Thank you, Sebastian, for moderating. Thank you, Pinar and Maxim, for sharing such great insights on and making sense of the complex and timely issues. And we thank everyone for joining us. Please remember to respond to our survey question. And we will look forward to seeing you all in the future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.